all turned on, ready to go. So,
All right.
front, back.
Then can you get to the first page? Just quickly flip through to the first page. See if it's there.
Yep. It is.
It's not there.
No.
Oh God.
It's all right.
All right. Sorry.
It's okay.
Morning, Governor. Roland Stevens.
Roland, how are you?
Pleased to meet you.
Great. Where is Courtney?
She is. Our leader will be with us shortly.
All right. Nice question. Did very well. Excuse me? We're still looking. No, we'll be looking through all summer. Then we also have to get in. That's a different story. This year there'll be seniors in high school, so we got a year. Yeah. 6 months. Hopefully they know by January. So I'm going to go ahead and get off the top. You want me to sit up here? That's fine. And then I'll let you sit there. Ready for me to go?
Well, I'm impressed, actually. You converted the tax on sitting. You know what you say word that
Well, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started here in a moment, so if you could take your seats, please. We'll get started here in just a minute if you go ahead and take your seats. Wrap up those conversations, finish that networking, and we'll get started almost on time. Are you ready, Courtney? Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to our first ever Governor's Summit on Economic Development. Folks, we have got the best place in the world right here in Nebraska. And the reason we have the best place in the world is because of our people. You know, I had a career in business, so I know from personal experience, having hired thousands of Nebraskans, and now having the privilege of being your governor and getting to travel the state from one end to the other. The Nebraskans are the best people in the world. And when it comes to growing our state, which is the goal of all of us here in the room, we have got the single greatest resource that we could ever want, our people. When you hire a Nebraskan, you get somebody who is well educated, who's got a great work ethic, who's loyal, who's got a customer service mentality, and who will help your organization succeed. Nebraskans are engaged in their communities, in their churches, and in their schools. It's what creates the strong fabric of life we have here in our state. And so it is a privilege for me to be here today to talk about how we can capitalize on the great foundation we have here in our state and look for opportunities to be able to continue to have that great way of life here in Nebraska. How can we look for the opportunities, look at the gaps, see how we can do better in the future so that we can continue to grow our great state? We have lots of opportunities, lots of challenges that we need to address, and we'll talk about those here today at this conference. We'll talk about issues, for example, like workforce development. This is a key issue because we've got to make sure we've got the right workforce here in our state so our companies can expand. And we know we've got challenges when it comes to technology-related industries, the STEM courses in our schools, and also in the high-skilled manufacturing jobs. And it's important that we think about workforce development on the entire state level. And we'll talk about that as well, because we can't be a healthy state if we're only growing Omaha and Lincoln. We have to grow the entire state. And how do we develop that? Now, in my administration, we've taken some steps along those lines. For example, the Nebraska Developing Youth Talent Initiative is a grant program that helps connect the private sector with schools so that they can bring that experience working in a technology company or a manufacturing company to reach out to 7th and 8th graders so they can start thinking about careers in manufacturing or IT. And we've got lots of schools all across the state that are thinking about the same sorts of things, whether it's the Career Pathways Institute in Grand Island or what the York high schools are doing with Rankin Manufacturing. There's lots of opportunities where we can continue to think about how we focus on that workforce development so that we can make sure we've got that right, trained, skilled workforce that will help us grow in the future and create those opportunities for our young people to pursue their dreams and have the lives they want. Housing is another issue we have to talk about. And again, this is one that maybe is more of a priority in our small towns and rural communities. But if we've got the great jobs available, we also need to have that great quality of life. You know, as I talk to folks all across the state, when young people are making that decision about whether they're going to stay in their hometown or move back to their hometown, it revolves around three basic things. Job, for both spouses, connection to family is important, and then quality of life. Well, folks, quality of life involves a lot of different things. But housing has got to be one of the important ones up there on how we address. And we see different communities addressing this in different ways. For example, in Broken Bow, there was a group of banks that got together to create a fund to allow developers to access low-interest loans. They built a 24-unit apartment complex that way. In Fairbury, a bunch of business people got together, bought a house, sold it, and then invested the proceeds in buying another house to fix that up. In Deschler, Rankin Manufacturing created some fourplexes to be able to offer housing to people working at their manufacturing plant. So as you can see, the things we're going to talk about are not going to be one-size-fit-all type answers on how we approach these problems. They need to be tailored to our different communities. And that's, again, a part of why we're all here, is to spark that conversation. Think about those ideas and how they apply not just across the state, but down to our individual communities. Because it has to be tailored to each community for it to be successful. We're also unveiling the research today from SRI, and we're going to be talking a lot about that and their recommendations. How about we need to focus on those high-tech jobs, innovation, quality communities. These are the sorts of things that we want to focus on as overall strategy. And specifically, we'll talk about such issues such as our incentive program and some of the recommendations they're making there for how we can improve our incentive system today to be able to focus on growing our state in the right way. As I'm sure you all know, we have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country at 3%. Usually ranks us around 2, 3, or 4, depending on the month. Now that is a great deal for folks that are here, but it also presents unique challenges. It also allows us to think differently about our incentive system. Some of the recommendations that we're making today will talk about how we reform those incentive systems. You know, for example, looking at pay-for-performance type measures so that businesses can have access to that as they're making strategic decisions with regard to those incentives. Using third-party data to judge those incentives so businesses aren't creating a lot of new metrics to be able to satisfy and be able to collect on those incentives. Focusing on jobs that are going to be paying above the county median wage. Again, we can focus on those high-paying jobs. And in fact, focusing that if you're paying, say, 200% of the median of that county's jobs, those average salaries, that we do even more incentives for that. So these are some of the ideas we want to look at when we're talking about our incentive system, so that we can incent those high-paying jobs. I often talk about our ability to grow the state means that we got to create more and better-paying jobs. And targeting to make sure we're bringing those industries that have those high-paying jobs is one of the opportunities we have with our incentive system. And so again, we'll talk about that today, and here's some recommendations on that. And finally, I just want to wrap up by talking about what we just announced upstairs at a press conference, which is the new brand for the state of Nebraska. I say new brand, it's really a rebranding. And for those of you who may not be familiar with what a brand is in marketing, a brand is simply a promise. It's about who we are and what we represent ourselves to be to the people who are going to interact with us. And in particular for the Department of Economic Development, this brand is something they're going to use to present the state of Nebraska both nationally and internationally. It's going to be that promise to those people who are not from here about what we represent. And you'll see up here, it's probably a little hard to see, even in the front rows it's probably a little hard to see, but if you go have a chance sometime throughout the day here to stop by, you'll see what it is Nebraska. Good life, great opportunity. And this really speaks to who we are as Nebraskans. Of course, if you're from Nebraska in this room, you know that we have been using the good life for decades here in our state. Because again, it gets back to who we are, that we've got the greatest place in the world to live, that we've got a wonderful quality of life. And that great opportunity is that opportunity that all of us feel we have here in our state to be able to grow our state. It's something you can use if you're on a ranch in the Sandhills or living in a high-rise in Omaha. Whether you're a startup in the Silicon Prairie or in a Fortune 500 company or working on one of our farms and ranches. Good life, great opportunity is something that represents who we are as Nebraskans. And that's why I think this is a powerful branding, because it really is about who we are. I'm going to paraphrase John Steinbeck from East of Eden. A story will not last if it's not true, if it's not how we feel about ourselves, and it's true of us. That was really a paraphrase that time, Courtney. That was close. If you ever go back and read East of Eden, that was close. But the idea there is, again, if you're going to tell a story, it's got to be true. And that's what good life, great opportunity really represents about us here in Nebraska, that it is true to who we are. And it's also a branding that is flexible. We'll obviously be rolling this out through all of our state agencies, and some of them have already taken the lead to adapt them to their unique circumstances. So, for example, the State Patrol is going to say good life, great tradition. Our Department of Roads is going to say good life, great journey. And this branding is flexible so that if you're in a Chamber of Commerce, you could use that with what you want to brand your city. So it's got that flexibility to be able to be used by our agencies, by Chambers of Commerce, by anybody who wants to use it. I was talking to Dave McCracken. He said, good life, great beef. Absolutely. We got the best beef in the world right here in Nebraska. And that's something we can promote when we go back to New York, to talk to like the folks at the Burger and Lobster who use Nebraska beef in their restaurants. So that's some of the ways that we can use this brand, and in particular will be used by the Department of Economic Development as we're presenting ourselves as a state to the rest of the world, and how we're going to brand ourselves to be able to grow our state. So again, I want to thank you all for being here today, because we at the state of Nebraska, we do a lot of important things. We build the roads that people go see their families on or get to work on. Right? We protect the public safety. We provide services to the most vulnerable people we have in our state. But none of what we do is possible without all of you. Without all of you creating the opportunities, those great opportunities, creating the jobs that help us do our jobs. We can help facilitate all the things that need to happen. But you are the ones that are going to be doing the hard work of creating those jobs, of creating those opportunities for our young people so that generations of Nebraskans can continue to find the good life here and those great opportunities, that we keep them here and that we attract those young people from all across the country to come here and make Nebraska their home. I'm excited about our opportunities. I'm excited that we're all here today to talk about where we go from here. Because, folks, when we come together, which is part of the great heritage and legacy of who we are as Nebraskans, that we come together to solve problems. When we come together to solve problems, the sky's the limit. So thank you again, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney Detlinger, who's going to take us on with the rest of the program. Courtney?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. When we first talked about the Governor's inaugural Economic Development Summit, my hope was that we'd have a couple hundred people in the room to talk about these important topics with us. So to see 400 plus Nebraskans filling this space to talk about economic development and how we move the state forward is really heartwarming. It's exciting. I'd be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity here to talk about our sponsors. We couldn't have put this on without their assistance. You'll see them up on the screen, but I want to take an opportunity to thank them for coming to the table and helping us offset costs. We wanted to keep the costs down for each of you so that so many people could participate in this summit. So thank you for making that happen. In addition, we have a number of elected officials who've joined us today. From the state level, the county level, the municipal level, school boards. If all of you would stand so we can give you a hand for taking time to be here today. This work started late last fall. We brought SRI on board to take a look at our state. In order to know how to move forward, we need to know where we are. We need to know how we compare. To forge a strategy, we have to understand our workforce, our industries, our opportunities, our niches and advantages. The work that SRI has done is going to help inform our policies moving forward so that we can be strategic in addressing not only some of the challenges that we face, as the governor mentioned with workforce and housing, but also how to take advantage of those opportunities that are laying in front of us. We have good incentives at the state level currently, but they don't necessarily fit with all of the industries that we want to recruit or that we want to grow within the state. What a great opportunity we have today to hear the results of this months-long process and truly understand what we need to do as a state to move ourselves forward. How we need to position policies to give us the tools that we need to build our businesses, to recruit in industries that are truly going to move the needle when it comes to wages and quality of life for residents of our state. One of the first topics that we have this morning is going to be with respect to target industries. It's incredibly important. Economic development, as you all know, is so broad. We can't and shouldn't chase everything. In order to be successful, we need focus. We need to know where we have the greatest likelihood of success. Roland and his team have done a great deal of research into our economy, into our supply chains, into our existing businesses and the skills of our workforce. but they've also taken the time to talk to a number of you, going out across the state, 4 different listening sessions, and hearing from dozens of Nebraskans. Thank you for taking the time to give input to this process so that we can fully understand where we are and where we're going. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Roland Stephen with SRI International. He and his team have been a pleasure to work with and have taken a very methodical approach to looking at the state as a whole. And right now, Roland's going to share with you the target industries he thinks are going to be Nebraska's opportunity for growth.
Courtney, thank you. Governor, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for the warm welcome. I was here in January, and now I'm here in July. Because as a social scientist, I understand it's the variance you really need to get a good grasp of. Actually, it was unseasonably warm in January. You had a snowfall right afterwards, and maybe you remember that. So I'm going to begin very, very quickly who we are at SRI, what are we doing here, and then a very high summary of the top line framework or a strategic view that we now have of the state. But I want to start on a note of humility. Everyone in this room knows more about Nebraska than I do. I hope that perspective and research and looking at some benchmarks elsewhere will allow me to bring something useful to the table on target industries and on strategy. But the best part of today will be the questions to me and among yourselves about what you hear, because that's what's going to refine this project and move the ball forwards. So, let's see if we get this work. SRI International is a nonprofit independent contract research organization. So we're based in the West Coast. We have some other offices. Our goal is to help build a better future, right, with effective investments in science and technology. We do a great deal of actual research and development for the federal government, advanced research of various kinds. That's not my part of the shop, but it's worth knowing that when it comes to a technology-based, skill-based, economic development strategy, SRI is uniquely situated to understand what that takes. My center in Washington, D.C. is a policy center, so we help regions, states, countries get the most out of their investments, especially investments in science and technology. Various areas we do that in, evaluation, building innovation systems. But the bottom line is we help our partners do better in the 21st century for economies that are based on technology and talent. And that is where Nebraska is today. What did we do here? What are we doing? I think you heard from Courtney very clearly. Take a look at the targeted industries, look at some of your current economic and community development programs, and provide some recommendations. I thought the governor's comments were very important in this regard. There are no silver bullets. You're going to hear a variety of recommendations and thoughts, not even recommendations, preliminary thoughts about some of the opportunities and the challenges facing Nebraska at different scales, at the level even of individual communities, and that's the right way to go. So we're not here, I haven't arrived here flown in with some recipe in my back pocket, and you'll be disappointed if I've thought in those terms. We came out here, of course we looked at the secondary material, cluster analysis, quantitative analysis, and workforce data, but the best part of the job, the part of the job I like always, it was interviewing stakeholders, and by that I mean most importantly business, and then coming here and doing the listening tour and meeting dozens and dozens and dozens of people all across the state. Smallest airplane I've ever flown in when I went to Scottsbluff. The first one broke. We waited. The second one broke. Then they said they fixed it, and we took it. So here I am. Apparently that worked fine. Nebraska's economy is at a turning point. A good turning point. Okay? As you'll hear, steady, almost relentless economic growth, very low unemployment, but you need to make the shift towards a high-quality, high-value economy. And here are four broad goals to have in mind as you think about the policies and practices you're going to adopt. High-skill, high-wage jobs, you heard it already from the governor. Technology-intensive investment. I'll talk in some more detail of what I mean about that, but that's indirectly affects jobs, but it directly affects wages and other important elements in the ecosystem. Innovation. You're going to hear in detail from my colleague Jennifer Ozawa on Nebraska's innovation system at a separate session. And then high-quality communities. Quite a bit to say about that, too. You heard it from the governor. The best part of Nebraska is its people. The best part of any economy is its people. And business now follows people, not the other way around. In the 21st century, business follows talent. So you've got to take care of your talent. So in pursuit of these goals, we've got sort of 4 buckets of ideas and recommendations. We're going to talk to different points in the day. We're going to talk about the tax credits and other incentives. We're going to talk about that right now in this session. My colleague is going to talk about various ways of increasing investment in the Business Innovation Act in the next session, session 2. After, I've got that back to front, actually. After, well, session 3, I think we're going to do the housing in session 3, and workforce at the end of the day. Many places we go to, these kinds of charts are reversed. We help people who are below the average, above the average in unemployment, below the average in workforce participation. They have problems. You don't have those problems. You know that very well. Look at that, you're down, as the governor said, from week to week. Are you first, are you second, are you third? Very low unemployment rate, grew right through the Great Recession. Incredibly high labor workforce participation rate, and what's great about that is it means that you're not hiding your unemployment. They're not discouraged, they're not sitting on the sidelines, they're not, right, they're there working hard. Even compared to the Midwest as well as the United States as a whole. Midwest is a good benchmark for Nebraska. However, by contrast, average annual pay is low, lower. The gap between the Omaha Metro, and we have, this is the Council Bluffs included in the data here, and the national average is not that great, but elsewhere in the state the gap is fairly significant. How do Nebraskans deal with this? In a characteristic way. They work hard. They work more than one job very often. So per capita income's pretty good in Nebraska. That conceals probably other sources of income as well. But you want to wrestle with this wage question. Now markets in the medium term will solve that. If you have high demand for your workers and they're not being paid that well, in the end, their value will grow. The opportunity is to, at the margin, choose policies and practices that's going to accelerate that process, that's going to bring more skilled work with better wages associated with technology-intensive activities more quickly, I'm not sure if that's really grammatical, but you know what I'm saying, quicker to the state of Nebraska. That's the task ahead of you, to grow the state. And this is not something that is subject to a lot of disagreement. Wages, skills, and the technology intensivity, which correlate closely across businesses. So whichever way you get there, you're going to end up with the wages you want if you shoot at all of these things. Here's a structure of the economy. It looks a little strange to you because the agriculture and food processing cluster seems to be on the small side, and that is an employment-based picture of the economy. Why? Because jobs. That's what economic development's about. On the other hand, we know that by value, Nebraska feeds the world. I'm not going to spend any time really addressing agriculture in this discussion, but it's got a big job ahead of it. There's another 2 billion people going to join the planet in the next few decades. Nebraska's going to feed them. On the other hand, we have some other sectors here organized by employment. Business, financial services. We're going to talk more about services than you might imagine. The U.S. is a service economy. Nebraska is a service economy. Nebraska and the U.S. export services. That's a good way to live in the 21st century. Not the only way, but a good way to live in the 21st century. And then there are some other promising areas. Of course, beyond transport and distribution, you know very well. Some high-tech research and creative. And then we feel some very promising mid-level manufacturing jobs, community college type skills, well served by the community colleges in Nebraska, often located outside the Omaha, Lincoln metros in some of the smaller towns of Nebraska, but prospering quite nicely. So, let me turn to my notes actually, because I'm sure I have something interesting here. I want to make sure I say the things that I wanted to say. Old age is terrible. I've already pointed out, but it bears constant repetition, high wage, high skill correlate. Right? Skills are the path upwards. We're then also interested in critical mass, so we look at the degree to which employment is concentrated in Nebraska or in Omaha or in a particular part of Nebraska compared to the rest of the country. We take that to be a sign of strength. More than that, we take a look at the growth rate of a cluster. Even if it is not heavily concentrated today, is it growing rapidly? And by the way, and especially if it's something that has the high wages and the high skills. Does it tie into national and international opportunities? And finally, and this is a point very well worth emphasizing and bearing in mind in the future. Does the cluster offer an opportunity to diversify the state's economy? In financial services, Omaha area is very well situated, as you know, I think. It's concentrated in one or two particular areas, as you know, particularly insurance and some other financial services. You have a tech sector also, some fast-growing firms, but those are recent arrivals. The future of the state is going to be as diverse as possible, both in terms of the kinds of sectors, the kinds of businesses, and the scale. When you go to an economic development meeting like this in Michigan, they wake up every morning and they're thinking two things. How can we stop the auto plant leaving? And how can we go and catch another new auto plant? That's a simplification. That's not fair to Michigan, which is a complex economy, but that's high on the list of things they're thinking about. They're thinking about big fish. I believe, especially in light of the employment situation in Nebraska. Do you have 5,000 people looking for manufacturing jobs in an auto plant right now? Right? Even supposing you had the site. That is not what you're thinking about. You're thinking about a diverse, complex economy with small and medium-sized enterprises, technology-intensive, skill-intensive, that are rapidly growing. And when we came across the state and did our listening tour, I had one of my favorite things to do was a visioning exercise. We invited people to think about Nebraska 10 years from now from the point of view of different perspectives. A student straight out of UNL, the owner of a medium-sized manufacturing enterprise. They all wanted, right, the overlapping set in everyone's preferences was for diversity. And I don't mean, diverse people, although that's good. I mean true diversity in economic activity, diversity in career paths, diversity in business networks. That will generate the kind of resilient, steadily growing economy with the kind of wages you want in the future. So, just a high-level summary here. Agribusiness and food processing. Let's notice, and let's be honest, food processing plants aren't necessarily well suited to the Omaha metro area, right? But there are areas of the state where they are welcome. If you could be sure they're going to pay above county median wages, which is doable, then that's an appropriate target. So what is appropriate depends locality to locality. Some food processing, by the way, on the actual cooked foods, finished foods products, is higher value than even the majority of the food processing we see in the data here, and that's worth thinking about. It's energy intensive, it's worth thinking about. Financial services, established strength. Call centers and e-commerce, an established strength, but there's a problem. Does not pay very well. Not actually growing, as you'll see in the numbers. Transportation and logistics, obviously an established strength. Again, a great example of how economic development is a bread and butter activity. Right? Nebraska was established essentially, Nebraska grew and flourished based on railways and rivers and now the interstate. So that's something to build on regardless. Some smaller clusters with emerging strengths, biosciences, we'll look at that. Renewable energy, even beyond, of course, the ethanol piece, there are some opportunities in Nebraska, we believe. Advanced manufacturing, we're going to dive into that a bit more. And IT and data services, the workforce, the shoe pinches on the workforce there very strongly. Large clusters, we need some work to build the value proposition, health and medical services. So some people come and they do an analysis of a state and they'll say, well, the health sector, that's just the service sector. That's not important. You can export health services. What that means is people come here for treatment. And indeed, given the excellence at the University of Nebraska's Medical Center, people should be coming here for treatment from the whole wider region. And that's a service export, and the jobs associated with that service export are quite highly paid by anyone's standard. Business services generally is an employment strength certainly in the metro areas, and then tourism, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Tourism, of course, is not a high wage activity. There's some subcategories in there, but I'll talk a little more about why I think that's important. Let's dive down. Agricultural machinery. I just want to see, because this is one of my favorite things to see here, this is what's called a location quotient. That is crazy. A location quotient of 2 is very high. So location quotient for agricultural machinery in Nebraska, in other words, how heavily concentrated is Nebraska by employment compared to the rest of the country as a whole is over 7.5. And that's a nice lot of jobs, 10,000 jobs, average pay $55,000 a year, and those are jobs often located outside Omaha, Lincoln Metro. So that's a existing, very significant strength. You notice some of the food processing, primary agriculture. The primary agriculture data is all messed up because this is BLS data, so I wouldn't look at that, but the food processing, on the other hand, lower. Doesn't mean to say there isn't a place for that in some rural areas, but that's a very different proposition. Agriculture and food wholesaling, growing nicely, pays better. That's tied in with your logistics comparative advantage. Financial institutions, again, well paid, growing steadily above the national average. Here's the call center e-commerce. Stagnant at best, e-commerce, and that's a strangely defined NAICS, and there's some things in there which, for example, PayPal or Cabela's, which are not in that data, okay? But you notice that those are average wages which are below your urban areas' averages. They could be done somewhere else. They could be done honestly. They will be done increasingly. First of all, they'll be automated. And second of all, they're going to be done outside the United States entirely. Biosciences, agricultural biosciences, small total level, 2,000 jobs, growing fast, well below the national share in terms of its concentration. But we know about Nebraska. We know the excellence at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. We know that you have very substantial investments by agribusiness. That is an area that can and should grow. It's growing fast. It's below where it should be. That is an opportunity for the future. Needless to say, well paid. Medical biosciences, the data there, the growth rate there does not look very promising. I think that may be lumpy. I'm not trying to decide. This is 2010 through 15. There may be some idiosyncrasy in that number. Turn down to IT data services. Nice lot of jobs, very, very well paid, growing nicely. We're going to hear later on today that has bumped up against a fairly significant workforce constraint. So that's a huge opportunity, a well-paid opportunity, got work to do on the workforce side. Advanced manufacturing. Did you know you actually have a sort of automotive supply chain cluster in Nebraska? Those are good jobs, two-year degrees, people controlling high-technology machines, well paid, relatively speaking, especially outside the metro areas. That's an opportunity, and you can imagine, given the logistics advantages you enjoy in Nebraska, the big supply chain partners, they don't mind where things are made. There are some things got to be delivered just in time in an airplane. But for the most part, as long as you have a reliable supply chain connection, they don't mind where it's made. They can be made here, they are being made here. That's an opportunity for the future. Precision metals. Machinery, equipment, appliances seems to be a little, is not keeping up. Although still well paid. Here's the health services discussion we already had. Ambulatory, so those are really just outpatient hospitals. Again, you're close to $50,000 a year to be paid there, but you see that location quotient below 1. Given the medical assets you have in Nebraska, that figure should be higher. You should have higher employment there at providing and exporting services outside the state. And finally, of course, freight distribution and warehousing, rail transportation, the data suppressed for that, but we all know you have, I think, something like 12,000, 13,000 jobs in Union Pacific and Burlington Northern. Management companies and enterprises, I think what's interesting about this is a lot of jobs. This category of employment is spread across businesses, spread across headquarters operations, and this is why you want the headquarters operation. Well paid, growing rapidly, concentrated nicely in Nebraska, in the metro areas chiefly, compared to the rest of the country. And then finally, tourism and hospitality. The first thing, of course, which you already know is that it's not that well paid. Food and beverage, arts and culture, sports and recreation. Not even gambling is well paid. I'm not sure what that's about. Sports and recreation. These, however, tend to be associated with lifestyle entrepreneurs, right? They are very valuable to the quality of place which you want to build in this state. when you're recruiting someone, and I talk to businesses who do, and you're calling someone in the Midwest and you want the middle manager with high level of technical accomplishment, and you want them to come and work in your business in Omaha, what are you going to say? Come for the mountains? Not really. Come for the beach? No. Great rivers, great fishing, great hunting, bicycling, right? All kinds of outdoors activities. Those activities are sustained by lifestyle entrepreneurs who just love it. And they're highly complementary to the other goals you have in terms of building a high-skill, technology-intensive economy. So this is a good example of how the numbers do not tell the whole story, in my view. I'm glad we're going to keep going here, and I'm sure a lot of people will jump up at the end, Courtney, and they'll say, I don't see myself in that picture of the data. And the answer is that's a fast tour of the horizon, right? Driven by analysis of the employment data. But I'll be glad to take questions or comments or contributions at the end of this to, did I say that well? At the end of this to fill out the picture. Let's turn quickly, I don't know how we're doing time-wise, let's turn quickly to Nebraska's advantage, which is the Nebraska Advantage Act. Of course, all states use devices, now chiefly tax credits, that's the tool of choice among most states, to influence expansion and relocation of business. Tax credits are not why businesses come to or stay in Nebraska. They come and they stay for the basics. They come and they stay for the infrastructure, for the workforce, for the location, because of the sources of power they have, because of the quality of life. But at the end of the day, when a business leader, and I'm sure there's someone in this room who've made these choices, is making a choice, they will have 2 or 3 alternatives. One will be Sioux City, Iowa. So tax credits and other economic development practices are a way of putting your thumb on the scale to make sure you get the business at the end of the day when the business investor is down to a short list. I think that's as good a description of it as I can think of. And there's another piece to this, which I think is very important, which I think is now fairly settled in the literature. Clusters really exist. In other words, any business, automotive parts, large-scale equipment manufacturers, fast-growing technology firm, they live in an ecosystem of suppliers, business service providers, customers, and workforce. They like to be co-located, they like to cluster with others because they get positive spillovers from that association. The labor market is deeper, the sources of supply are deeper, and so on. Strategically used economic development policies can build clusters that will draw others. That's the name of the game. This picture of spillovers is pretty well established. The trick, of course, is to be strategic. And I think Courtney said, you can't chase everything, and you shouldn't. So how do you design your tools? Are they effective? That's just a baseline. And are they strategic? A little description there how Nebraska Advantage works. That's a very little description. There are very few people in the state of Nebraska who know how all of the details of the Nebraska Advantage approach to tax credits. And if that person's run over by a bus, we're all going to be stuck. All right. There are many satisfied recipients of tax credits through the Nebraska Advantage Act and through its predecessor. LB 755, is that right? Oh, amazing. 775. I knew it was 755. Typically, established firms looking to expand have a good relationship with Department of Economic Development, have a fairly straight path in terms of their projected growth, who can confidently achieve the attainment period, which is how you're judged, and then confidently cash in the credits and benefit accordingly. But there are some aspects of it which are frustrating, can be a little bit frustrating. They have a low net present value. So if you're recruiting someone from out of state and you say, well, we've got these great tax credits, but it's going to take up to 15 years before you cash them all in, that's low net present value. Also, and this varies from firm to firm, and it varies how quickly you attain and so on and so forth, but there is a danger of unused credit. So you've made a promise, if you will, to a business investor that they are not able to fully take advantage of. Conversely, also, that then becomes an exposure. That's on the books of the state of Nebraska, right? An obligation, which has to be, hypothetically, has to be resolved at some point. And then administration is complicated, and I don't want to be too harsh on this. Nebraska is a conservative state with a small c when it comes to its financial affairs, and that's a good thing. Nebraska is one of the few states with a AAA credit rating. That's a good thing, right? This shows up in the way that the tax credits are used right now, is that there is an attainment period, that the recipients have to report scrupulously, the reports are scrutinized, and then they get the credits. That is not an unreasonable way to do business. That is, however, can be seen as burdensome. Is there a different way? That's something we're going to turn to. You can get a credit for a new job that offers as little as 60% of the median wage of the state, which is already, remember, 20% below the national average wage. Right? So it does not discriminate really among the kinds of jobs. There are thresholds, there are some other things associated with it. And of course, how do you give a tax credit? Right? Through a rebate on capital costs and also in some cases sales tax on capital and some other paths, but chiefly sales tax on capital. Consider, if you will, a fast-growing, technology-intensive, talent-intensive business in Lincoln. I'm making this up. Right? You hire 7 people with advanced degrees in nanostatistics. That doesn't exist. And you're good, and you grow fast. You're very busy because you're competing against the best in the world. You don't buy any equipment. You build your own computers, the ones you had in graduate school. No sales tax. You don't have time to go and talk to the Department of Economic Development and figure out how to apply for this thing. And you're not generating a lot of jobs, so you might not even meet the basic threshold. You're just generating great jobs. So, as designed presently, a business like that may or may not benefit from the program. Is that being as strategic as you want to be? All right, and then not subject to clear metrics. Well, they're associated, aren't they? Right? Everyone gets some, right? As long as there's lots of jobs. And you know that the legislature, in reviewing originally the Nebraska Advantage Act, couldn't figure out what the objectives were, but they said if there were some objectives, here's some metrics that you might consider. So we're going to turn to that in just a moment. So here are some suggestions. And you heard them really from the Governor. Thank you. You stole my thunder, so I can't. I was told to. All right, very good. I got nothing more to say at this point. Pay as you go. Right. So you increase the net present value very significantly. Independent low-cost sources of data, the unemployment insurance records are a simple, confidential, so they have to be managed very carefully, a simple path to checking up on a firm as it hires and employs and pays people in Nebraska. So that's independent sources of data are always a cheap way to go if you can, lowers the burden. Have a discretionary fund. These are widely used. They should be subject to very strict ROI estimates based on your goals. So a discretionary fund is a pool of money which, depending on the return of the investment, you assess from a prospect, expansion or recruitment. Does it fit with the targets that you have in mind? How long will the payout be? You use that fund to close the deal. It's not good for every occasion, but sometimes, to just pursue the metaphor of the thumb on the scale, it makes the difference. Could be a keystone in a cluster using a fund like that. Jobs-based tax credit is only available at or above county median wages. And I say county so that you get the variation. It doesn't have to be actually a county. It could be different regions of the state. So you acknowledge the difference. And the Nebraska Advantage Act does that now with micro-enterprise loans in rural areas. You acknowledge the differences in needs across the state. Cash incentives for people who are hiring. Maybe they're trying to recruit talent from out of state, highly paid talent from out of state. Cash incentives are another way to go. These are all practiced by different states, in some cases direct competitors with Nebraska. Cash incentives are used by Oklahoma right now. And finally, credits for investment in technology and capital, new capital and new technology. Here's a final example, and I'll stop, Courtney. A final example, but a very important one in my view. Given Nebraska's situation, you're not just job hunting. So I spoke with at least one, I remember this interview, someone who had benefited from an early stage from LB 775, is that get right? Right? And then came back around again and was looking for a tax credit with the Nebraska Advantage Act. Paid a great deal of money for process improvement in his plant. New machinery, new equipment. Only a handful of jobs, maybe only 1 or 2 new jobs. Couldn't get a credit. Do you want to help that guy? That machinery, that capital investment, that's expanding your property tax base. That new process will require increasing the skills of your workers that you already have and paying them more. You want to support that activity, and as currently designed, that's harder. Oh, end of the show there. I thought I had, we got my slideshows mixed up, but that'll be fine. So my last slide, which was a good slide, you'll have to imagine it. My last slide talks about how once you have a strategy and you know you're going for wages above median wages, when you're going for high value add, the measures that you should apply to see if you're succeeding fall out pretty naturally. So it's an approach that lends itself to metrics and that meets the very proper interest of the legislative committee, the legislative audit committee on the economic development policies and practices. So I'm going to stop now. Glad to take any questions. Of course, as you can tell, I'm not from around here. I'll say just 2 things about that. My wife and I almost ended up with joint appointments at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln 20 years ago. And if they had, my 3 children would be Nebraskans, and that would have been just fine. It's a great place to live. Secondly, I will not take any questions on Brexit, even though I was originally British. Some things are, like the, what is it? Thanks very much. I'm going to get a glass of water.
We have a couple of mics set up in the room, one right over here and one over there by Lori Shaw. Any of you who'd like to ask a question, please just line up behind those mics. We've got 15 minutes here before the break to ask questions specifically about what Roland has just outlined for us. But we're very appreciative of his analysis here, and I think we can all agree we want to move the state economy forward. This is laying out a great framework for us and how to do that. He mentioned putting the thumb on the scale to win these jobs. If you run a race and you come in second, you get a medal. If you come in second in economic development, you don't get anything. This is exciting. We're looking forward to your input on this and your questions. Let's open it up.
Hello, Cecilia Harry with the Greater Fremont Development Council. Your recommendations about using county median wage as kind of the threshold for some of these projects. Could you speak a little bit to the variance that we see in terms of county and median wage by industry? So we have some industries in the strength column that their median wage by industry is less than the county median wage. But could you speak a little bit to those variances and how we can still attract those industries that'll bring value to our economic base but aren't quite at the county median wage?
Well, that is a great question and a very specific question and a great example of how the devil is in the details by community, right? Now, there are, you could imagine, for example, and I don't want to get into this too much, but you could imagine, for example, a food processing which has very strong upstream benefits for a class of producers in Nebraska. It may be that the jobs in that are right at or even not at the county median wage. Should your rule be, oh, well, we're not going to help that. So it may be that the judgment of the spillovers from that, right, and there may be downstream processing that's done elsewhere in Nebraska that you want to supply. Right? Co-locating in these kinds of situations, where co-locating with feedstock is the name of the game. And that is a judgment call. So you would want to design your tools either by using discretionary instruments where a legislated instrument doesn't work, right? Or indeed you would like to design the legislative instrument with a great deal of granularity. That's hard, I should say. And really you don't want to because it makes it complicated. So keep the tax credit framework as simple as possible, but with a rule that takes account of local variation in wages. But to the extent that then there's this difference, well, the median wage is in locality is above what we're really interested in this particular sector, then you're going to need to turn to a different path. It doesn't mean to say already, that should be ruled out. It is a flag. The goal of the state is not more jobs. Lots of jobs, more than one in a lot of cases for people. The goal of the state is increased skills and wages. So you just do have to keep that in mind. Shouldn't be a bright and hard rule will just create challenges as well. But that is the law, that is the framework set up at the beginning, and I think it's the right way to go. Yes.
Lance Edquist, City of South Sioux City, and I totally agree in terms of having to go for higher wages in our communities. We have hundreds of jobs that are open across the state of Nebraska, and we've talked about that for a long time, but we're just not getting new jobs and new faces in our communities. We really need to look at doing more robotics and new ways to process particularly agricultural materials in our state, whether that's oats or soybeans or cattle or hogs, whatever it might be. A lot of those jobs are very repetitive in basis, in how they're handled. And we really should be looking at ways that we can actually reduce the number of jobs but increase the salaries at the same time in those industries.
And in some ways, our work was deficient in this area because, in fact, SRI is a world leader in robotics. So let me just say, whatever task you think cannot be automated, you're probably mistaken.
Correct.
So food processing and that piece of the chain with the repetitive heavy lift is going to undergo an extraordinary transformation in the next 10 to 20 years. That's not the only thing, by the way. And the great thing about those, the jobs that stay is that they are people managing machines, which is very well paid and requires quite a high level of skill. There are jobs now in auto plants where you need a BA to be on the line. And you're paid accordingly, of course. And you're not lifting metal parts every day. That's done by the robot. So were you next? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mark Paniska, former chairman of the Ponca Tribe in Nebraska, and first I want to thank the governor for having this summit. It shows you his good business background. And also I was pleased to hear, I'm chairman of the Northern Ponca Housing Authority, I was pleased to hear him say that housing is an important part of citizens of Nebraska quality of life. And I guess the other comment, first I appreciate Dr. Stephan. You're right on, Governor, in hiring him to do this. I'm really impressed by what he's found. The other thing I would like to say is ask the governor and the state to include the tribes as far as economic development. We want to be able to help our people, but also the other citizens of Nebraska that we work with. So thank you.
Hello, Jim Linder. I've been involved in higher education for a lot of my life, and your comments stimulated an idea that's maybe a little odd. So I'll ask if anybody is trying this. If you look at communities that are lacking certain high-skilled areas, say engineering, for example, are there any states that are pursuing a tax credit for individuals who complete degrees in that area and choose to stay in the state, or use to recruit individuals to that state?
Do you know of any cases of that? Yeah. Well, and so that's a good point. So there is, by the way, in some states a model, but it's been in business for a while. But of course, it applies to medicine. Right? You give people forgiveness. I know I had a friend who went to Duke Medical School, and she had to spend quite a long time in a rural town in North Carolina in order to get a discount on the cost of that. So I think that's a great idea. That's something you'd want to parse carefully.
Yes.
So, for example, something as simple as in-state tuition in certain STEM fields for people from outside Nebraska. They come, they get educated here, some will stay. Right? Or loan forgiveness or tax credits or whatever the device that would require careful consideration. This is a financially prudent state, and that's a good thing. But but given the current situation, that's I think the right way to think about things.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Keith Station. I'm with the local Workforce Investment Board in Omaha, Heartland Workforce Solutions. And my question is, one of our strategic initiatives is to focus on the disparities that exist in high unemployment areas and high poverty areas. And what have you seen in other communities that we as economic developers can maybe think about how to address that disconnect between the relatively low unemployment rate in our state and our Omaha, Council Bluffs MSA and the high number of unemployed people, particularly those in those high occurrence areas of poverty and unemployment? What have you seen in other places that work for this group to be able to address those disparities? Thank you.
So we've got a full session on that, just advertising. Last session today, so you need to stay for that. But especially all leaders want to address the needs of underserved communities, because that's the right thing to do. In Nebraska, that's the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. To the extent that you have underserved communities, and maybe they are not included because of transportation problems or geographic concentration, there are a variety of forces at work here, and we heard a lot about it when we came up. To the extent that they are not drawn into the educational system, they're not drawn into the workforce, Nebraska's leaving money on the table. And I have a feeling the governor doesn't like that, to hear that. Right? You're leaving money on the table. So some of the devices, which by the way are already in place but could use expansion in this state, and you see elsewhere, are mid-career adult educational opportunities that help people with some college or little college who didn't complete, or who want new skills to get new skills. We'll talk a lot more about that later, but that is a very important way to seal the pipeline, or to bring people back into the pipeline and keep them there in terms of jobs. And then there are some challenges in Omaha on the transportation side. So, one more question.
Marta Sonia Londoño Mejía, Executive Director of Midlands Latino Community Development Corporation. First, I want to congratulate you for your presentation, because diversity, to consider many businesses in different sectors, is the clue for the success of the state. Other point that I want to talk is about the quality of life of Nebraskans. It's true that this is a wonderful state to live, but it's necessary to consider that the level of unemployment is not 3% for all communities. For example, in minorities communities, you can see through the states some areas where the level of unemployment can be 13%, 15%, or 17%, and also in rural areas too. I think it's important to consider some special policies to attack this problem, no? Because these communities are not represented in these kind of rooms, for example, no? And they are part of the community, they are increasing, actually are representing 25% of the total of the community in the state. This is the question: what is possible to do with these minority communities? They are starting businesses, are still very small, and they don't have many incentives to increase the businesses.
As to we will talk about the most important thing is for them to be drawn into the workforce, but we also got to recognize, not only with, say, in some of the urban areas, but in some small towns, you have isolated, you might say encapsulated communities of non-English speaking or immigrants from outside the state, outside the country in some cases. In the case of Hispanic immigrants, though, they are very often now onto the second or third generation. They represent a tremendous opportunity on the small business side, which I think you're referring to, which needs to be recognized. And they represent a tremendous opportunity, we heard in our travels, for business succession, which is a challenge in small towns outside Omaha and Lincoln, small towns where you have established businesses. People are looking, when they retire, we're just going to close down the business. There are pathways of drawing in other groups, leaders in other groups, people with experience, to take over those businesses and to sustain those small town communities with the business. The other piece is the educational piece. We'll talk about this later, but it's, although when we heard rightly that K-12 education and some of the innovations around that, the academies, is very, very strong in Nebraska, that is not universally so, and there are some gaps which have to be filled, which, for example, the community colleges feel present a challenge. So we could talk more specifically later, but those are some of the pathways. Okay. Always the educational pathway.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to take my notes here.
Thank you all for your thoughtful questions and comments. We've got time now for a short break, about 15 minutes. If you'd like to take that time and then come back in, and we'll get started next with Jennifer on an innovation report.